Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. Our programs are sponsored by Fieldstone Memory Care of Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers innovative and compassionate care in their accepting residents. They also offer day stay and respite programs. To learn more or schedule a tour of Fieldstone's apartments on Rolling Bay, call 360-689-4314. Also, I'd like to acknowledge that the Senior Community Center is on the ancestral homeland of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Suquamish tribe, the people of the clear salt water. We honor them and we are grateful for their hospitality.
Ageism basically is defined as discrimination, prejudice, stereotyping based on age. Internalized ageism is something a little different. I mean, you could see age-based discrimination in employment, housing, healthcare, lots of places where that it really can make a big difference adversely to our health and well-being. But one of the worst forms in some ways is, because it's so insidious, is internalized ageism, in which we deny commonality with others in our same cohort. Like, maybe we don't want to hang out with people who are 60 plus. I don't know how many of my friends have said things like, oh, well, not my friends necessarily, but people I talk to about the senior center are like, I'm not old enough to go there, or that's full of old people. And you're like, yeah, like you and me, kiddo. Clinging to youthful mannerisms, and that doesn't count people like me who are perennially immature. That's a different issue. But things like wearing very youthful clothing or cosmetic surgery, trying to always look and act younger because I don't want to look my age. Fearing, I think really essentially, we fear to be devalued socially and culturally, and not wrong. We're not wrong about that in a lot of cases. But again, when we do it to ourselves, when we internalize our own distaste for the aging process, I think that's when we do ourselves significant harm. And also we're modeling something for our families, our grandkids, our kids, neighbors, friends. We're modeling that inherent bias, that implicit bias that so many of the cultural isms are taught overtly, like, you know, through things like age discrimination at work, when there's mandatory retirement, for instance. And that came about because back in the day, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, the assumption was that employment was a zero-sum game. And if any old person who was holding a job and taking up space was keeping a young person out of a work. Like, really, that was the idea behind mandatory retirement, and yet it's still going strong to this day. And there are many examples like that, and I hope some of you have thought of some and would like to bring some up. Barbara, is your hand up? Barbara O? No, you're just making a gesture. That works too. The book that I would use for This Chair Rocks, A Manifesto Against Ageism by Ashton Applewhite, is a great book. 2016, it came out, and it really launched basically kind of launched a social movement in a way to move beyond ageism. That's one of her big things. And she challenges us in a lot of ways through this book to look at our own internalized ageism, and where in places that we are ageist instead of ways we're not. Because as she points out, we can't challenge bias unless we're aware of it, and we're all biased some of the time at least. And ageism affects pretty much everyone. And if you can think of examples from your own experience, I would really love to hear them. I know for myself, it's really kind of been tricky because I look at a lot of things that I do anyway that might be considered product of aging, like tending to isolate more and not wanting to be outside with a lot of other people because I don't necessarily perform as well or the same way they do. But some of that, I think, is actually COVID issues bubbling up through through the whole thing. But looking at ways that that we self-identify, I think one big piece for a lot of us is health pessimism, that we feel like as we're older, even when our health continues to be pretty good, we worry that it might not be, and we start becoming more pessimistic about our future. That's really a common one. Oh, Lena, could you tell us something?
Hi, good morning, Anne. Good morning, everyone. You mentioned if anybody wanted to share a little bit, maybe about their own experience with aging. I'm in my late 50s, so is my husband, and a lot of my close friends. And with COVID, a lot of people lost their jobs, myself included.
Mhm.
And what we're finding in the last 3 years of trying to get back into the workforce is the competition with the younger generation.
Yeah.
And how the interview process is even different, for what we feel is a lot different in that the technology piece that they're literally being raised on, they're lickety split on being able to navigate everything related to technology. Whereas it might take some of us a little bit longer. We're kind of on the cusp of, before the internet versus the internet's here and now. So we kind of have a little bit of both worlds going on. We do have a lot of great skill sets to bring to the workforce, but we are noticing that our competition is now a lot younger and a lot more fast paced. And so, that just seemed to be a big red flag that we've noticed in the last 3 years.
Yeah, I've heard that's an excellent point. I've heard a lot of people say if they apply for a job, they're offered a volunteer position.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
partly, I think, to reflect the fact that you can usually get away with paying a younger entry-level person less than you want to pay someone who has job experience. But that really is another form of ageism as well, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and just because a person's older too doesn't mean they don't necessarily need the income. I think it's the opposite in today's world. I know more elders who still need to work, unfortunately.
Exactly. Yeah.
And myself included, when I get better, I'm going to have to get back into the workforce as well. And it's unfortunately not everybody has the luxury of not being able to work. And so how do we transition that and kind of coexist in the workforce with all these age groups from 20 somethings all the way to up the ladder?
Exactly. And of course it is illegal to base your hiring decision on age, and yet it's really it's difficult to prove that. AARP
it is, and it's all a matter of words. Yeah. It's all a matter of wording from the company standpoint. They'll never, if they know, they won't necessarily say it's because your age. I've actually had a close family member was told point blank, you are too old. And I said, that's illegal. I won't get into that, and not on this forum, but a lot of the smaller ones, companies were blatant about it, but more bigger ones know what they can and cannot say. Professionally and so forth. And I understand that. But that's a reality, I think, for a lot of people.
Well, Lena, with your HR background, how did you handle that?
With the HR background, you could never, again, really say to a person, it's illegal to say that, age, it's because of your age. Companies will tend to look at using wording, we found a better fit, quote unquote. Which is not necessarily untrue, but it's just part of navigating that whole machine, navigating the whole machine. And ultimately, it's the policy and procedures of the company. What are we doing? A lot of the people who have to share the bad news are just the messengers. They're just clocking in and clocking out like everybody else, kind of thing. It's the policies and procedures and the decision makers behind that are really the ones that have the power about this, and the ones that hopefully have the ears and to listen to feedback about what's working and what's not working, what's fair and what's not fair.
And AARP has a whole program that's specifically designed to go after ageism in employment, and that's something, if anybody wants, there's some good information and tips on their website. They do really good work for championing elders, of course, because that's their entire reason for being, but it's very helpful. Nancy Lewis, you had something to offer.
Well, yeah, I was just going to add to the comments that I have also been told that we who are still in our homes are contributing to the lack of housing, because we were supposed to go off into nursing homes, and we're not. We're aging in place, and that's a clog in the flow of housing.
I have not heard that. Wow.
It didn't sit well.
You think?
What
did you say?
I said, what I really said was, well, I think if you're lucky enough to be able to age at home, then that's exactly where you want to stay, and wait until you get to be as old as I am.
And by the way, Reed has put the link to the AARP aging thing on the chat. So if you want to copy that or take a look at it, or follow the link and copy that, you can do that. Barbara O?
Yeah, thanks. So I listened to a podcast by the author of This Chair Rocks, and there were several statistics that she quoted at the beginning, which I was happily surprised by. One was, she said the dementia rate is decreasing lately, and that only 2 to 3% of old people end up in nursing homes. And that is so much lower than I had anticipated. So that was good news. And then she talked about the U-shaped curve of happiness. And I, for one, didn't expect to be as happy as I am at this age. And I think that's one of the reasons, like, being at the senior center on a regular basis is such a positive experience. Is, I don't know, there are a lot of us that are really happy now. So yay for us. But that's not how we're portrayed in the media. That's not what we're raised to expect.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been a lovely discovery.
Can I ask what they attributed the lower incidence of dementia to? Did the book talk about?
This was a podcast, so she didn't go into detail.
Okay. That would be
But if
good.
you want to look online, there's a couple of studies. Well, there's quite a lot of studies that would help you guide. Let's see. And Joanne is saying IVC has launched a community assessment survey called Growing Older in Bainbridge Island, a community survey to residents 65 and older, as well as those under 65 with a medical disability. The survey responses will help inform our understanding of the services, resources, and programs available for older adults and to advocate for improvements. So, and then she's putting in the link on so we can all participate in that if we want to. But yeah, if you want to look up like the reduced rate of Alzheimer's, I think there's a bunch of things. One is earlier recognition.
Yeah. Right.
There's also more options. Apparently it's still most prevalent in rural areas where there is not good healthcare and where older people especially tend to be isolated socially and intellectually. And those things we know are stressors that can definitely make that worse. But yeah, I mean, we are healthier on average, at least in the United States, but in a lot of other countries as well. One of the pieces that I find fascinating in the United States is what they call age stratification, which is the hierarchy sort of rating people according to their age group. And in the United States, the people with the least power, perceived power, are children and older adults. And then the next group is teenagers and older adults. And then the top group is adults of middle-aged, right? And that piece is not true in other countries necessarily. I remember in Costa Rica seeing in a number of towns, there were these places, that beautiful looking structures, and they had a name, and it turned out to be the treasure house. And that's what they call nursing homes or retirement homes. So
Wow.
the treasure house is where their elders, their precious, valued elders, are taken care of if they don't have family. I thought that was pretty amazing. It's like, I'd love to see something like that here, right?
Yeah.
Linda Frederick says, has anyone heard of the healthcare directive for Alzheimer's? I haven't found it yet, and I'm cautious.
No,
But it
curious.
sounds-
Sorry. I'm curious, and I think it sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, so we have, I'm going to look to see if I have a video discussion of it, but a healthcare directive basically says what I would like in the event of health outcomes. And so there are new sort of forms that you can fill out to try to help guide your family or your guardians in a situation where you might have dementia, because in those cases you would not be in a position to be able to legally express your wishes. There are certainly limitations about those healthcare directives that might not be available if you still are without dementia. I'm happy to follow up separately with that, and I'll put a link in the chat when I get it.
That sounds like a good program we might consider putting on in the future, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah, we've done a couple of these things with the idea of setting up healthcare directives. Dorothy Foster helped us at one point, and then Caroline Stevens also did a program like that. And I'm going to do a little spelunking here while Anne's talking to see if I can find a link for you.
Well, Joanne Maher's also done a little spelunking, and she has posted the dementia rates may be falling by 15% per decade from Harvard Educational News. So the link to that study is there in the chat too, which sounds excellent. So if we're looking again at ways in which we are kind of acting out ageism when we're not aware of it, I think Reed Cutts, started something when he said still, and I've heard that directed at myself and others. Wow, you're still pruning. That's amazing. Wow, you still carry about, a whole bag of compost. Yeah, still is actually pretty dismissive when you think about it, isn't it? And that's something I've caught myself saying on occasion and thinking. I've talked about senior moments jokingly. I mean, one of our favorite things to say is if you can't have a senior moment at the senior center, where the heck can you have one? And yet I noticed that my kids who are in their 30s and 40s and their friends talk about having that same experience. So I think I'm going to change it's a cute phrase, right? But I think I'm going to change my wording and think about that. Just saying something like, boy, with so much going on in the world, it's hard not to get distracted, isn't it? Right? Like, what are we really saying here? And thinking deeper into some of the reflexive little cute things we say. And cute's another one. Oh, did you see that cute little old lady? Oh my God, she's adorable. She's like a little doll. Like, right? That is so demeaning. And, you could talk about a child that way, and it would even probably be a little demeaning to the child. So really paying attention to our language and thinking, what is it that we're trying to say here? And trying to find a cleaner way. Francis Malone, would you like to throw something in here? I don't see Francis.
She's on mute.
Oh, well, that would be why. Francis,
back to the conversation about elders, and I love the concept of treasure house rather than nursing home. I just want to point out that we have a good example in the Native tribes that are in this area. They treat elders with such respect and honor them, and they are treasured, and they are building housing for them. But on the other hand, I was attending a planning session, a 25-year plan for the tribe once the Kwame Shores was acquired back after the final lease expired. And the tribe was discussing what they were going to do with that land and how it would be developed. They hired a consulting firm, and they came and reported this 25-year plan. And in it, they discussed housing, and they showed some examples, and they showed these duplexes. And the young man that was giving the presentation was obviously so proud of this plan and the fact that with the duplexes, they could have extended families, and the seniors could live in one part and the younger people with children could live in the other. And almost spontaneously and in coordination, the seniors there all said, "No way, we do not." We do not want to be built-in babysitters. So even though, the tribe respects and understands the elders, this young man was not a tribal member. And he was confounded by this reaction because he thought it would be just such a wonderful solution to housing and to babysitting and childcare when the young people wanted to work. That's a colonial kind of concept. It's not a tribal concept. But I laughed out loud because it was almost in unison. No way, we don't want that. They know they're cherished, and they, if there's a Black outage, a power outage, the first thing that happens is there's communication. Where are the elders? Is anybody safe? In danger? Are they being warm? There's transport provided to take them to the hotel or wherever there is heat. It's a wonderful example of how we can respect elders, myself being one of them. And I think we could learn a lot.
I totally agree with you. Joanne, what would you like to add? You're
Have to
muted.
unmute myself. Thank you, Francis. I think that was very interesting and a wonderful segue to what I'm about to ask, actually. My name is Joanne Maher, and I am the Executive Director of Island Volunteer Caregivers. And thank you for having me here. We want to be respectful to terminology. And oftentimes, I love the word elder. I think that shows lots of respect and dignity. However, we also want to be respectful of our Native communities so that we use that term appropriately. So, you know, when we talk about seniors, we understand that some seniors don't like to be referred to as seniors, and we're careful about the word elder. So now we've gone to older adults, but not all older adults are, I guess, what we think of in our market as older adults. So I wanted to get some feedback from you. I'm fastly approaching an older adult. I feel that I'm an older adult, but what is the appropriate term? What is the best term?
Boy, we've had so much conversation about that over the years. Nancy, you've sat in on some of that, I think, too, where we should rename the senior center. We should call it something else, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Do you
yeah.
want to, can you speak to some of that?
Well, only in that we never came to a conclusion. You know, we really didn't. We've been talking about this for 10, 15 years, and we didn't come to an alternative word. And then there was always the position that, well, if we don't call it the senior center, how will the seniors find us? That little argument, I think, is diminishing, since that was pre, computer literacy. But I'm sorry, I can't. I throw in the towel. I do not have an answer.
Reed, have you got anything?
Well, one of the things that that I think I've talked about a lot is that if you're going to have a senior center or a senior community center, as this one is called, you need to identify the sort of narratively identify what it is that you're swimming against reason to try to not call it a senior center, and you're better off thinking about redefining senior than trying to rename the center into something that will inevitably be, you know, if you were to call it the waterfront center, people would say, what's that? And you'd say, oh, it's the senior center. And then you'd be, then you'd be back where you started. So I appreciate what Joanne is saying about elders, although I think that it is not a bad thing for those of us who are over 60 or over 70 to start to internalize the idea that there's some wisdom that we have, that there is some value that we have that we didn't have when we were 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, that we are ideally not only happier, but partly that's because we have a little more perspective on what's important. And so I mean, I don't want to offend anybody in our native neighbors, but I think elders is not a bad word to keep in the mix. I see
I would
both
agree.
Francis and Marianne are
Yeah, I would
interested in
agree because
jumping
I
in.
grew up in New England where we were told from childhood to respect our elders, and that as family members age, they were the elders and you damn well listen to them. I'll tell you what. And now it's my turn. I want to be an elder. Marianne.
I'm sorry.
I'm feeling that part of that internalized ageism is inherent in those words. And I just want to take it on a personal level that it's okay for me to be a senior. It's okay for me to be an elder.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm owning it. And I am rising up and say, yay, I'm a senior now. I get to be a senior. And I will ask for my discounts. And I will smile as I ask for them. But one of the things that I really wanted to talk about was I went to the Suquamish Museum once, and part of the reason why the elders, I got this from an exhibit, the elders were revered was because they knew how to survive in our culture. And I think with this culture, we have lost the sense that the elders will help us survive. And I find that terrorizing to me because I think these young people, you know, there's money, there's greed, there's all this stuff, and we have to reframe very quickly. So I think that we have an opportunity in being elders to give some of this and to think that we do have something to offer. I'm really aghast at how socially disconnected as I get older I feel, and how I feel like I'm disposable, I'm wasteful. When the pandemic happened, I did this drawing of a grandma in a trash can because of the way people talked about grandmas. It really irritated me. Like we were just, the economy is more important. So I don't know how we can offer survivor skills, but I think these kids need it.
I totally agree with you, Marianne. Lena Wilson.
Yes. Hi. I love what Marianne just said, or actually the last few speakers. And, but I totally agree. I actually, when I turned 40, I'm 57 now. And at 40, I was one of the only people in my circle of age group that was embracing and couldn't wait to become an elder. We still in our house use the term elder, and we hold them with high reverence. We hold them with high respect. And I couldn't wait to be able to qualify. Once I got my AARP card, I literally was showing it to everybody with such pride and excitement, going, look, I made it. And all of us who have gone through trials and tribulations of life, it's like a badge of honor to me, saying we made it. After all was said, you know, that we've been through, we made it. And so I carry that with a lot of pride personally, but I also look at those around me. My mom is still with us. My grandma's still with us. And I hold them high, you know, on the totem pole. And I say that with honor. I'm half Native myself, Nooksack tribe. So it's definitely a respect thing. It's definitely a really appreciate and love them. As I'm getting older, I do have a different perspective and more patient, and want to take the time to appreciate the fact I have my mother today and my grandmother, because we've lost so many of our elders just in the last 3 years alone, that it becomes more, a lot more relevant to me, and that every day is precious. You hear that so many times that it's kind of takes the meaning out of it. But after what we've all been through in the last 3 years, I think it puts more meaning into it. And so I want to put these elders out there and hold them up high and embrace them and let them know they're here, and let them know they're seen and they're heard and they're important. And they have a lot to offer. All of us, the storytelling alone is priceless. It's priceless. So I don't have an input on what to name the center, but I love the fact that you guys are sharing all this.
Tribal members are offended. My experience, I was on the Suquamish Tribes Foundation for 12 years, and my experience in working with tribal members is that it's the younger elders who might take offense, because in the tribes, at least in the Suquamish tribe, you're an elder at 55. And in our non-tribal communities, we usually don't think of elders as being, or seniors as being 55. We usually kind of associate it, at least in my experience, with Social Security. And once Social Security, then you're a senior. I don't know if that's true with everyone's experience, but that's been mine. And I just think that the choice of words or this discussion and maybe the controversy about naming the senior center or not, or elder or not, or what's the word we were looking for, doesn't that kind of feed back into internalizing ageism? If we don't want to be called a senior, we don't want to be called an elder.
Yes, it totally does. You are absolutely right.
Back
Hey,
into
let's hear from Ruth and then Marianne.
Go ahead.
Okay. What I was going to say is that in every aspect of life, being a senior, like senior in high school, that's your highest level. You like to be a senior executive. It's only when you're over 60 that senior seems to have lost its power. But senior was, excuse me, my camera keeps going off. But senior is something to be achieved. And I think we should all be proud we've achieved it.
Exactly. That is
Amen.
a great point. Thank you. Marianne, you're muted. There you go.
So a couple things. I was raised in an Italian American culture, and the grandmas and grandpas were very much respected. You didn't mess with them. And I'm 75. I've noticed some real changes in myself. And one of the things that I feel like I deal with inner ageism is that I discount the value of my stories and of my wisdom. So I think I need to pass it on to my grandkids. I've been writing, I was writing in the past letters to Ella and Lily. And I think all of us, you know, can do something like that, you know, write down our experience and share it with the next generation. It's those survival skills that somebody was talking about. You know, we have so much, and I always think of the line from Hamilton where he was 20 and he said, where I come from, many people don't have half that many. We have had lots of years, and it is such a blessing. It's such a gift. And I also think we should be proud. In my 70s, I have noticed changes in my energy. And here's another inner ageist thing. If I want to take a nap, I dog the crap out of myself. It's like, oh my God, you're taking a nap? And a friend of mine said, so what's wrong with that? And I thought, what is wrong with that? You know, because part of, to me, inner ageism is thinking if you do need to rest or you can't do exactly what you used to do, then you don't have value in the culture anymore because I'm not a wage earner anymore. So that's where what I'm dealing with is acknowledging changes in my body and my need for rest, and also at the same time knowing I still have lots to give and lots to contribute, and doing my best to be mindful of the things I say to myself that discount that. So that's my
because that self-talk is really a guide to what you really think about your age or your abilities. And boy, the idea that being a wage earner is the only way we can really contribute, I think that is pretty offensive too, right? Really and it goes sort of back to the thing of like so many of my friends, when they go apply for a job, they're invited to be a docent or a volunteer thing. It's like, well, honey, you know, there's young people who really need the work, but why don't you do this wonderful free thing for us? Yeah. And to some extent, sure, that's absolutely right. You know, we as a generation, people who are probably 60 and over, grew up in a golden years of volunteering, when volunteering was very positive. And Bainbridge is lucky that we have a lot of really skillful people who are very happy to be wonderful volunteers. Right. But I notice as I run a number of volunteer things that the numbers drop pretty significantly. And it's not only because people are working or day busy, it's also because it's sort of not a cultural strength at this point. You can get a lot of people out for a one-off, but like steady long-term, that's where maybe our generation's are stronger in that cultural value, that we value giving back. And people talk about that a lot, but you don't always see it very much. They want to start a foundation or something and let somebody else do it. And that's great. You know, Bainbridge has what, Reed, you probably know, 250 nonprofits on this island, something like that.
Well, it's something like that. It's certainly a very large number relative to the population. And yes, we do. I mean, a lot of us do require and depend on volunteers to make it happen. But that requires us as organizations to recognize ways to identify volunteers as not a given, but as a valuable resource or a valuable participant that we need to do a good job of recognizing.
Mhm.
Well, and help ourselves recognize it. I think that's part of it. It's like, because of this internalized ageism, we undervalue our own contributions pretty significantly, I think, or the bias, that internalized unconscious bias is that, like what Marianne said, you know, that we're not really, yeah, you can sit around and tell stories, but yawn, right? Well, no.
No, right.
Right?
This book has been a wonderful resource for me in being mindful of the changes in myself and that I still have value. It's called Alive Until You're Dead, and the subtitle is Notes on the Home Stretch. And it's by a woman who's a Zen Buddhist named Susan Moon. It's not a book about Buddhism, it's a book about her age and the changes in her life and knowing she is still of value. And about volunteering, I don't volunteer very easily because I do get tired. And time seems so precious to me that I think with all the other things that I do, sometimes I just don't have the energy anymore. So I have to be very sort of mindful about that.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
That's respecting yourself, and that's
Exactly.
respecting your life pattern. And that's really important too. And for someone like me, I get energized by volunteering, obviously.
Mhm.
And I think it keeps me from doing, you know, spending the rest of my life doing puzzles and knitting. I mean,
Yeah,
I still do those things, but I tend to, if I'm not busy, I'm probably up to mischief. So it's good for some of us to stay on it, right?
I'll call out Joanne as someone at Island Volunteer Caregivers who does a good job of, you know, organizing volunteers at the level that you are willing to volunteer.
Mhm.
So you can either sign up as a one-off, or you can sign up every week, or you can sign up this week but not next. And I think that's a model that all
There's
of us
really no commitment.
and I think we try to do that here to the extent that we can. Obviously, we depend on somebody to answer the phones at the front desk, but you don't have to do it every week. And I think that's part of the balance of recognizing that people have complex lives, and that's part of the way that we can recognize your value is to let you volunteer in a way that works for you. And I know, Marianne, you have actually done a little volunteering around here, and we appreciate it.
Well, the other point of that is when we volunteer at our senior center, we're volunteering for ourselves. Everything we do there promotes the kind of programs and services that we're all happily providing and using ourselves. So it's a little bit different, maybe not hugely, but I feel like that is sort of the circular economy thing of like, we are making sure this is here for us as we continue to age, right? I love participating. I think it's been such a joy to me as I've reduced my working for money role and become more and more interested in doing the kinds of things I always wanted to do but didn't have time for. Now I do, and I love that. This is a rich, you know, wonderful time of life for me. And we all, you know, we have to say, honor your limitations too. I think that's exactly right, Marianne, that, you know, there's no shoulds about it. It's like, it should come spontaneously from your heart that you really want to do stuff. There's no have to, that's for sure.
And some of it has to do with whether you're an introvert or an extrovert.
Mhm.
You know, I do lots, but it's lots of sort of spiritual stuff and intellectual stuff and discussion stuff. But actually going out into the world, like lots of the wonderful stuff at the senior center is not stuff I've ever done. It's just not me. So anyway.
You take what you want.
Take
No,
what you want. Yeah.
Francis has posted a great, to paraphrase a Native American saying, when an elder dies, a library is lost. That is a beautiful thought in a way. I mean, thinking about it in terms of all of us being libraries, right? And so who's going to open that book unless we write a preface or make an invitation or give some chapter headings to people who might be, you know, I think that's one thing to think about of ourselves as having had interesting lives and being full up with richness that we can offer and share. I think that's a really great place to come from if you're thinking about telling stories to your family or sharing in your experiences. That richness is definitely a resource to be tapped. Joanne.
Oh, you know, my parents were from the Caribbean, so I'm first generation American, and like many other cultures, our culture was really to revere our elders, you know, and to really put them up on a you know, on a pedestal because of all this library of information that they have. And it seems to me that we need to create a positive senior culture on our island. I've often thought that we are living in such a wonderful place, and we have kind of a very small area. And if you have a small area, you can really change the culture more easily than you would, of course, with a larger area. And it just seems to me that one of the things that IVC could be doing, and we all could be doing, is to create a positive senior culture on the island and really do that proactively, because I think it benefits the individual. I think it benefits all of the children that'll grow up on this island. It benefits us, obviously. So that's just a comment. I could hear me, he's frozen.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's something we're very interested in doing. And part of it, though, does require a shift of perception. Because, like I said, I can't even tell you how many times when I talk to people, like in the grocery store or something, and you're like, oh, I haven't seen you for a long time, and what are you doing? And I'll say, oh, yeah, I'm really involved at the senior center, and I'm doing, you know, editing the newsletter and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, senior center? Whoa. And I was like, oh, yeah, we do some awesome stuff. And they're like, oh, I'm not old enough for that. Or isn't that just a bunch of old people? I love that. And I go, well, you know, our youngest member is in her teens. So I don't think it's just a bunch of old people, but that's even, in a way, that's sort of skewing the point. Like, why are we afraid to be self-identified as old? And why are we unwilling or uncomfortable to be in the company of elders? Maybe last year sometime, we did one of these inclusion study groups on bias. And I included this little link to a Harvard Medical School bias assessment thing. You can take a number of them. There's a whole bunch. I think there's like 15 little bias tests, and you find out if you're biased for or against old people or wealthy people or people of color or women or lots of things, right? Religious people. And I discovered that I was biased toward young people, but not biased against old people. But I think it's one of those interesting things of like, what we don't always know our biases because they're hidden from us as well, right? So looking more deeply at what we have absorbed culturally, and really looking at, why do I have that reaction, or why does my friend have that reaction? And maybe those are conversation points, you know, not necessarily a teachable moment, but certainly a conversable moment to say, wow, that's curious. Like, who do you hang out with then? Or, right? Because I doubt if they're mostly down at the, you know, hanging out at the teen center. How do we shift that perception?
Yeah.
I think, did you just post that thing? Yeah, take a test.
I did. Nancy Lewis has her hand up.
Oh, thank you. I don't always see those. Nancy.
Well, it sounds like if we are not feeling like we are a library, then, and we are not projecting that we are libraries, then who's going to miss us? You know, In other words, if a senior dies in a certain culture, they believe a library is lost. So I think, to Marianne's point, if we write about and start telling about in our individual ways our stories in our libraries, we can, and this is this is my way of going to how can we become a culture that is honored. Right now we are not, okay? So there are cultures out there that are honored. How do we, us, get there?
Exactly. And
Okay.
that's,
And
yeah.
that to me is the nubbin here. Raise your hand when you have something to help with that concept.
Well, I just had kind of, I mean, I don't know, this is a wild idea, but it's,
Right.
But, you know, we could have a sort of senior center blog where, you know, Marianne writes a poem or a reflection and we post it, and we just kind of keep the postings coming, and we share the things that are the observations. It might be a little more permanent than writing a letter to the editor. But a thoughtful letter to the editor placed at the right time can also show some perspective that maybe is lost in our day-to-day. I don't even want to call it a conversation.
Right. Joanne, do you want to say what you put in the chat?
Oh, what I put in the chat. What did I put in the chat? Okay. I think that one of the things that I won't take too long segments on Bainbridge. So kids, these you know, different age segments of the population, and do exactly what Nancy is referring. You know, what is our library? You know, you can target, for example, kids, and we at IVC, we have a hard time doing this, and we probably need some volunteers to help us with this. But how can we get young families with kids to do activities with seniors and show their value? You know, what are those opportunities? Let's get them in front of seniors, because oftentimes kids and families, they're kind of afraid of seniors. They're like, oh, what do I talk about? And oh, they don't know how to do social media and look at on the screen. You actually need to engage with somebody, and it would be good for both the young family and their kids and the so-called senior or elder. You know, those kind of programs, those kinds of messages need to happen. And I think that's how you create a positive community that looks at seniors and elders as a positive member of the community.
Yeah, I think that we should reach out to Bainbridge Youth Services and Boys and Girls Club. At the center, we have on the past done a couple of intergenerational game days where at the end of the school year, we've invited a middle school class to come to the center, and then connected folks. At some degree, I would say it's mutual fear, because we've had some difficulty getting seniors to think that they could hang out with middle schoolers for any length of time. And in fact,
I don't blame them. That's scary.
No,
but I will say, Ordway had I don't know if they have it anymore because of COVID, but they used to have rock and roll readers, and for my kids, that was an awesome experience. They loved it and looked forward to it. So things like that, I adore.
I agree. Bonnie, I'm sorry, I realized you had your hand up a few times here.
Well, that's okay. Well, now things keep flashing through, but one of the interactions that we had was really that you led was more on sexual things, but it was interaction of generations, which I thought was extremely powerful. And I was so really impressed with the young people's ability to say and, you know, articulate what their thoughts. But in response to I believe Lena, I don't know, her comment, I feel like the senior community on Bainbridge, we are a small place, but it seems to me that it's the most vibrant community. When you look at the splash that you edit, and there's 8 or so pages, line by line of activities, from languages to physical activities to photography to dancing to singing to what, I mean, one of the first things I did when I got here was stop at the senior center when we were thinking of moving here to make sure they had duplicate bridge. And I went in and met Reed, and I came back and I said, "Oh my gosh, this is fantastic, Lawrence." You know, I think the senior community here is stellar. I just, yeah. And I have had a friend say the same thing about, she didn't feel she was old, you know, I mean, she's not that much younger than I am, but she wouldn't want to be hanging out at the senior center either with the old people. But it's just crazy to me. I mean, it's such vibrant, wonderful people at the senior center.
We sure enjoyed having some of the teenagers, the high school students who are part of this inclusion study group came to our ice cream social and were telling us they're both seniors and were telling us their plans and saying, but we're going to stay in touch. We really enjoy these programs. And it's like, you know, I think we have been doing some things that have been good as far as outreach goes, but we could always do a lot more. Ruth, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. Yeah, for a while, IVC had a program of pen pals where they hooked together high school girls and seniors. And I don't know what happened to that, but I thought that was an excellent idea for, you know, to share back and forth generational differences or similarities, if you will. And the other thing is, as far as what you were saying about your friend saying she wasn't old, and you know, that she didn't want to be senior centers for old folks. A lady said that to me, and I looked at her and I said, well, if that's the way you feel, you're way too old for our senior center.
Good for you. I'll comment a little bit about the pen pals. You know, we love working with our youth. I think we need to realize that, you know, when you get a group full of youth that are very energized about it, and then they're seniors and they leave to go to college, the following group may not be as energized. I just think that we need probably a volunteer. If a volunteer could help us, just keep on helping to remind those youth programs that the Pen Pal program is valuable, and making sure that, you know, making the calls and making sure that they stay on top of it. That's where we struggle, but I do love the Pen Pal program, and we're trying to have it come back. So again, if anybody wants to help us with that, that would be great.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. And I know some of the inclusion study group students were part of that. And when they came to do some in-person stuff, they actually met some of their pen pals, and there was a really sweet little reunion thing. Anita, you've had your hand up.
I did. I was wondering if there's any program for children's gardening on Bainbridge. I'm here from Ohio, and I worked at a botanical garden, and we had a children's vegetable gardening program. And so that was a great way for volunteers of all ages to share their gardening experience with children. And when you're doing, you know, you're working side by side, it's a very comfortable way to mix with ages.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. We have a hands-on gardening program on the last Tuesday of every month, which will be next week, 10 to 12. And we've got lots of planting to do. And this year for Earth Day, we had a big garden renovation and cleanup. At the heart of it was replanting some more things in the front, which we redid last year. And it was so lovely to have families come and work with the kids. Yes, absolutely. That's funny. I went to school in Ohio and I was part of the Big Brother, Big Sister gardening program, growing vegetables and having such a great time. Part of it is you got to have some space. But I also do the gardening at the library, and we've had over the years many kids groups come through and be volunteers helping that, especially in the summer times. But yeah, we would love to have something like that. Maybe we could talk about that a little bit later. You can get my contact information from the office anytime.
Oh, thank you.
Marianne.
And yeah, I'm going to just mention here that there was a question about what is the Inclusion Study Group. You're in it. The Inclusion Study Group is a series of conversations that we've been having, even I think before COVID. Anne has done a lot of the logistical work and facilitating. Thank you very much. And we've talked on a variety of topics that would lend themselves to discussions of inclusion. So we've looked at how to better welcome and interrelate and learn from our Indepino neighbors, from our members of the Senior Center who are LGBTQ, and also people who are in our high schools who are younger. And this is our topic. So if you want to be included in the emails that Anne sends out, again, just get her email, or we'll let her know, Linda, and she can include you in future alerts.
Why don't you put my email in the chat, and then anybody.
I will do that.
We actually started this in 2019, and the idea was Barbara Golden is on, and she was the person who said, "How do I know I'm welcome if I don't necessarily see anybody who looks like me or seems to be like me?" And I thought that what a great, amazing question. And we really need to look at that. And so I actually invited a bunch of my friends to sit around a table and talk about how can we become more welcoming, more overtly welcoming, and more clearly inclusive. And those early conversations with 8 or 10 people sort of blossomed out. And then before I knew it, COVID happened. So we couldn't meet in person, and we started Zooming. And that actually opened up the conversation to a lot of people, like the high school students and teachers, who probably wouldn't have been able to come to the Senior Center at 11:30 in the middle of the day. But during that COVID period, they were able to, and that kind of built the basis of this. But we've looked at lots and lots of different kinds of inclusion questions, and we are always welcome. I mean, you are always welcome to send ideas and suggest topics, because like the next one we're going to do is going to be about how do we protect and support economic diversity on Bainbridge Island. And then we're going to look at another one about ableism. How do we, as a culture and as individuals and as a society and as a senior center, how do we work well with people who are maybe not as, might be developmentally disabled, might be physically disabled, visually impaired, hard of hearing, need a walker, all kinds of things like that, that can be really difficult to navigate in our culture.